All right. Okay. So we're going to talk about AI search tactics at work. I'm going to talk about some e-commerce stuff and some elements there. Let me just move this along to here. Okay, wonderful. So yeah, I'm the head of AI search and SEO communications over at Wix and Wix Studio. I do enterprise growth marketing. I get to have input on the products that we make. I get to talk to lovely SEO folks like yourselves. And I get to go to Boston with James, and I get to do comms leadership as well, which is always a joy, always very exciting, and always a pleasure, and getting to speak to folks like y'all. One of the other things that we have done recently in the last few months was over at Wix Studio, we have created something called the AI Search Lab, which is all about AI search, GEO, LLMO, AIO, whichever thing you want to call it. Essentially, we're looking at how brands can be more visible in AI search surfaces, ChatGPT, Google, Gemini, Perplexity, Claude, Grok, DeepSeek, all of them. We're looking at all of those elements. We've got some fantastic content there, including things from folks like Rand Fishkin and Kevin Indig, folks like myself. And we also even have an AI search glossary, which might seem a little bit old school, but what I tend to find is that when I'm looking around for information about AI search and all of these sorts of things, I find it really tricky to find content that is actually geared towards me as a marketer. And this glossary isn't just about machine learning generally. It's not about how you can use AI to transform your business necessarily. All of the terminology that we have in here can help you get to grips with how you can use AI and how you can be more visible within AI. So why does AI search matter? I'm sure you're all aware of it, and you've been talking about this. You know, people are calling it various different terms. When I'm talking about AI search, I'm talking about all of them, not just ChatGPT, not just Gemini, but some of the other ones as well. Um, the global visits are significant. So, for instance, we're up at 58, like 5.8 billion monthly visits. That was as of August. It's even higher now. And I've been tracking this for a while, so you can see that it continues to grow. The pace of the growth has absolutely slowed a little bit, but it's also increased as we see more rollout. So Gemini has increased its market share since I made this slide. So they're even higher now as they've been adding in a Gemini to Google Pixel 10 into Google Pixel watches and adding it into their Google Workspace elements. So with AI becoming more and more part of everyone's day to day, we will see more uptake with these things. And you can see that the usership is not necessarily, it's not close to Google's usership just yet. The blue there is Google's usership. However, you can see that it does continue to increase, whereas Google is pretty flat, like roughly give or take is pretty flat as it was a few years ago. And the share of AI search continues to grow. So when I first started looking at this chart of whether people are choosing to go to LLMs for their search information, the AI search part of it was a sliver, and now it's we're eking on to sort of 10-ish%. And I've got a guide to geo, and one of the things that I think that's really important to understand that to how to do geo and how to do this for e-commerce or anything else is to understand how to be visible in LLMs. And in order to do that, you need to understand how the LLM responses work. And to do that, to be completely transparent, I've tried to explain this in other ways, but the best way to do it is with the other Mrs. Carter, Beyonce, Giselle Knowles Carter. So one of these people is Beyonce, one of them is me. I'll let you figure out which one it is. But essentially, with the types of responses, you have three core types of responses. You have your pre-trained responses. The PT in GPT is pre-trained. And essentially, that's where you've ever heard the phrase dense transformer model. That's when they were first rolling that out. That's what they were doing. So they had a source data that was a fixed training data source, and it was dense. It was just one big collection of information. And in order to get that information, they have to pick through all of it to find the information. When they do that, when they and now their training data is a little bit more ordered and things like that. But when they do that, when they're using their training data, the links may or may not be included in the response. For things like this, an example question would be like, what is the Wizard of Oz? Well, that's an old thing that hasn't changed. It's static. Once they learned what the Wizard of Oz is, they don't need to go to a website to find out what the Wizard of Oz is. For rag generation, retrieval augmented generation. This means that they have a fixed training set that they tap into, but they will augment this with search engine data and information from websites. So this means that they may include links based on their web crawling. With Gemini, they don't do live RAG, so they if they include a link, it might not be from a search right then and there, but it might be from a recent search within the last sort of few days, few weeks, etc. A good example of this might be if I was to say, like, when is Wicked for Good opening in the UK? And that's something that needs to tap into sort of current information to get that response. And again, it may or may not include a link, as it's kind of general information, so you might not need to point to one website to say that, but it will reference the web in order to generate that information. Then you have something called RAG, and then you have with the sort of mixture of experts reasoning, and these are the more sophisticated models. So the mixture of experts is very similar to query fan out, to that sort of element of that. And essentially, what that does is, in comparison to the dense transformer models where they have like one big pool of information, they have to go into it and pull things out. Essentially, what mixture of experts does is they will have a neural network of lots of different types of information where they will tap into those things, and they will only tap into the information that they need when they need it. So if I was asking about recipes for chocolate cake, they would tap into that neural network, a sort of recipe chocolate neural network. They wouldn't tap into a recipe, or sorry, into a neural network that was talking about the Wizard of Oz, for instance. They wouldn't talk about that because those two things are not related. With these ones, they very often will include links and updates. And a good example of this kind of thing is sort of if I was to say create a steampunk alphabet crochet pattern for somebody who with a wool and acrylic yarn sensitivity. They need to tap into lots of different networks in order to get that answer, and it will give them a sort of distinct bit of information. And don't worry, I'll get to the ecom stuff shortly, but it's very good to have this grounding. So with the pre-trained models, your models will surface the models answer without surfacing new information. They will vary by platform because they all have different information, and your updates will depend on data updates. This is like the encyclopedia. And so if you want to test this for a brand, one of the things you can do is you can ask them for some of that evergreen information. So you can ask them, what's my brand known for? What do you know about my brand? Who are my brand competitors? And this is something, if you're an established brand, you can check this and you can see, like, if they are seeing the right competitors. If they're giving you random competitors that don't make any sense, then there might be a sort of glitch in the matrix, as it were. They don't understand your brand very well. You can also check, like, what are my brand values? What are the USPs for my brand? If you were to think about something like Nike, for instance, or Disney, if you were to say, like, what are my brand values for Disney, for instance, it would be like, family entertainment, that sort of thing. If you're finding that they're not giving you the right information, then there's something awry in the pre-training that they have on you. And you can ask them general questions like, is my brand good? These are bits of information that they have generally on your topic. For these ones, they're tricky. They're tricky to change because they're in the data. But you can give feedback on these. In my documents and on the AI Search Lab, I have an article that talks about this. And essentially, you can go in, and if you see something that is patently wrong, so for instance, if your HQ is in London and they say that your HQ is in Manchester, then you can say no, our HQ is in London. Here's the address. Here's the link to the page that says about it, and you give them a downvote. This might seem like this is a nothingy thing to do, but it's not. Though, if you look at all of these tools, they all have a thumbs up and a thumbs down response on them, and the reason why is because that's really high in their training priorities. So they call it reinforcement by human feedback, and if they get reinforcement by human feedback, then they will make adjustments. So it's worth doing that if you see that. Monitor training updates to see if the information about your brand has changed, and then again tailor your response. For RAG responses, this is when they carry out the web searches. This is essentially the user asks the question and then it goes back and forth between its different sources. So it will look at its GPT, look at its transformer and its training data. It will look at its web results. For this one, this is Bing, and then it will use its generative tools to generate an answer at the other end. And when we look at some of these models, very often what they will have is they will have a way where they decide whether or not they're going to do this. So Perplexity, for instance, has a search classifier. And this is where they say, like, the model is trained to determine whether or not a web search is necessary. And for some of these, they will say, like, a web search is necessary for questions requiring current information, facts, or research, but is not necessary for creative tasks, math problems, general knowledge that doesn't require real-time data. Good example of this is Dolly Parton. So if I ask a tool, why is Dolly Parton considered a great musician? They'll say, I'll recall what I know about her, right? So this is DeepSeek, what I know about her. They're not going to say, I'm going to go on the web. And then they'll give you an answer because Dolly Parton's been making music for 60 years. She doesn't need necessarily, you don't need to look up latest news to find out why Dolly Parton's great. She's great. So they don't give you any links. However, with something like how did Dolly Parton influence Beyonce's Cowboy Carter album, then they'll have to say, let me go through the search results. So they're going to, and then with this particular response, they came back and they gave us 47 links. So with this one, you can check this on your brand by asking questions like, what are my brand's top products? Okay. So top is something that they use, for listicles and things like that. Best is something that they'll use for that. So think about those kinds of questions. Is this product on sale? So whichever product you have, ask it like, is this product on sale? And that will tell you whether or not it's actively accessing your website and whether or not it's giving you those sorts of things. Another one is, does my brand have a Black Friday offer? We're right on the cusp of Black Friday. If they don't know that you have a Black Friday offer, or if they say that you do and you don't, then that tells you that there's something going on, something's amiss, and you need to have a look at where they're getting that content from. So with RAG optimizations, you will still need to tap into your search engine ranking. Your search engine rankings matter. Do not ignore them. You will need to check your queries regularly. I'm sure you've seen a lot of those prompt tracking tools. This is why they do this. Um, Prioritize pages that have timely content and keep your content up to date. This is an example that from my own elements. I was showing that chart on the growth of Google, and when I updated that chart, it was on ChatGPT within about 30 minutes. Okay, so I said, how much has AI search grown compared to Google during August 2025? And within 30 minutes, Google ChatGPT was citing the information that I'd given, and they were pulling that information through. So think about your timely content. For a mixture of experts, and again, this is good. This is something that leans into your Gemini AI mode. Sorry, it leans into AI mode. It leans into your reasoning models. And essentially what this is the user will ask a query, it will pass through a gating network, and it will choose which experts it needs to be involved in the answer. Again, like I said, if I'm asking a question about shoes, it's not going to tap into the network that's all about chocolate cake. If I'm asking about, a football team, it's not going to give me questions about, or it's not going to tap into the network about podiatry. It's going to figure out which one it needs to do. And so when I first heard about this, I was like, well, what's an expert? Well, they seem to be divided into two different types of things. So you have your tasks, which are translation, coding, math, writing. If you've ever used Perplexity and asked it to do a math problem, it will pull up a Python script, and it will start doing that. These are kinds of tasks, and they're leaning on their expert of Python there in that instance to do that. If you tap into a topic, then you have things like topics like medicine, sports, law, etc., and that's how they'll do that. And then in between, they have the reasoning. And this is what AI mode is doing. So when they're crawling like 75 different websites, they're tapping into websites that are all within the same or within the relevant neural networks. And you can see them doing these reasoning rounds in Perplexities. They're really clear when they do that. So for instance, if I was to ask, why has the Renaissance film not been released for streaming? Why hasn't Beyonce released the visuals? Then it would say, let me look through the search results to find information, and it will break down that request. And then we'll use the websites as experts. The one I always give the example of is IMDb. IMDb, for instance, is an expert website on movies. That is precisely what they know about. So if I had a movie question, they would tap into IMDb for that because they're an expert. And then they'll do their logical deduction, and you can see this in Perplexity, for instance, when they're doing that, and then they'll generate a response. So if we are thinking of with your AI responses where you have your pre-trained data that's like your encyclopedia, and then you have your RAG generated responses, and that's kind of like somebody who knows lots of things that they've read in the encyclopedia, for instance, but they're also tapping into new information, for instance, like in a newspaper. then mixture of experts is like someone who knows something, but also taps into specific, unique people or are experts with specific, unique tasks in order to complete those things. So, for instance, Beyonce would speak to Post Malone for the Cowboy Carter album, but would talk to Kelly and Michelle when she's going on tour, and all of those sorts of things. But you don't necessarily need to bring everyone every single time. And the reasoning is something that happens across lots of models, but it helps bring it all together. So when we're thinking about this, we need to embrace current events, have an opinion, and optimize for UGC. Within an e-commerce space, this might seem like, well, what am I supposed to do with that? But actually, there's lots of things you can do. So for instance, if you were to think about this, one thing you might think about is trends. So for instance, viral products or categories. I went to the Cowboy Carter tour, and there were lots of websites, because I know because I was looking for an outfit, but there were lots of websites who were doing things with the cowboy outfits, and I think Primark had cowboy outfits and things like that. And you can tap into those trends, and you can make sure that they're very clear on your website in product categories, in lookbooks, and things like that. Having an opinion isn't necessarily reserved entirely for a blog, but there's lots of ways where you can declare the opinions that you have. So, for instance, if you have customer responsibility, think community responsibility elements. If you have things like your community guidelines, if you have a code of ethics that your team abides by, if you have your sustainability statements, if you have things about inclusion, if you have things about how you do recycling, all of those sorts of elements, those are opinions. Those are things that you have. If you think about the Body Shop, they've made it very, they talk about being ethical in terms of the way that they present the way that they test their products and things like that. And those are the kinds of decisions that will make the difference within those sorts of RAG MOE reasoning responses. So if I said, like, I'm looking for vegan skincare, for instance, the websites that have it declared on their website that, hey, we have vegan products, this is a vegan product, this is ethical, et cetera, will be tapped into. And so you might think about that with making sure that you're publishing those codes, but also thinking about things like how we close the loop blogs, or like talking about some of those elements either on your social, on your website, and various different elements. UGC is something that these tools tap into regularly, and by UGC I mean user generated content. And you should encourage users to comment on posts, and coordinate the copy with your SEO keywords, because you still should be doing that, and also with your GEO goals. And so with things like that, you can ask some of the questions around, I mean, on tricky topics. What do you think about? Let me know what you think about in the comments. That's something that people say really regularly on social media videos now, and that's something that you can definitely tap into to encourage more rich conversation, because they are also taking insights from some of the user comments. Your expertise. So you can tap into your owned data for on your products and your industry in order to make yourself citable by some of these tools. A really good example is like Spotify Wrapped. Spotify owns all that data on like which songs are being seen. Amazon owns all of the data, or sorry, Apple owns all the data on which ones are the top streamed videos, and that is something that can be, or top streamed songs, and that's something that can be a source for some of these things. You might think about creating a most gifted list, and not just a general list, but also a list with data. Like you could say, 75% of our customers this year chose cheese as a gift, for instance. That might be something that's really interesting, and that's data that only you have, and you can bring in some of those elements, and that's something that may very well be cited. But essentially, you want to give them a reason to link to your content. So let's think about some of the agentic things. I teased this on LinkedIn, but the things I was talking to before were ways that you can be included in LLM responses by individuals. But one of the things you can also think about is how you can make your e-commerce site part of the LLM infrastructure. So essentially, you're scaling your LLM response visibility, and you can do this in a couple of ways. You can do this by optimizing your web content for agentic access, and also by building partnerships and tools with LLMs. So when we're optimizing for agentic access, we are essentially submitting product feeds to ChatGPT. That's one way to do it. Adhering to new protocols. There's a bunch of them that have just come out, and also creating a agent-focused LLMs.txt. So I'll just get into this a little bit. So I'm sure that y'all have all heard about the ChatGPT shopping experience that has been rolling out sort of since spring in lots of different elements. So they've sort of added products into it, and then they've added in sort of different elements. So the ChatGPT shopping results are essentially one of the things that they said about it is that they are using prompt intent analysis. When they announced ChatGPT 5, they also leaned into this more. The prompt intent analysis has to do a little bit with, understanding the reasoning behind the query when they're understanding where there's buying intent in the question, and also making sure that it all makes sense. So for instance, if we look at this one, this was my own personal one. I said I'm looking for a water bottle carrier with a strap that can also hold a Google Pixel phone. Now, I haven't said specifically that I would like to buy a water bottle carrier with a strap that can hold a Google Pixel phone, but they have analyzed from what I've said that I'm very very likely to need a product and a recommendation in this situation. So this is what they're doing there. They also have talked about like structured metadata as being something that they're using, like price, meta details, etc. And at the moment, they are talking about this within feeds, which I'll get to shortly. There is also potential for them to be pulling this through in other ways. So, for instance, Index Now this year announced that they were including shopping feed data within their Index Now feed, and there's lots of different ways where that's evolving. The other thing that they're looking at is listicles, and those sorts of elements and reviews, which I'll show you in a second. They're also doing multi-search reasoning. So, they've, for instance, in that one, they've pulled through lots of different elements for the bag that I'm looking at. And they also have memory about the user. Again, with ChatGPT 5, this is something they've leaned into significantly. So when I was looking at, so I created a profile, and I'll probably share this soon on LinkedIn. So follow me if you're not already. And essentially, I had one profile in the settings, I said that I was a vegan foodie. And in the other one, I said that I was a bougie chocolate lover. And then I asked both of them. I asked on each one. I asked the same questions, and I asked, I would like some recommendations for some gym. For my gym wardrobe. And the vegan one had lots of stuff about, like, ethical consumer, like ethical clothes, and ethical considerations. And the I'm a bougie foodie one had none of that. Just had, like, go to Gymshark, et cetera, et cetera. So think about those in terms of memory and in terms of how you're positioning yourself with your client. So when we think about the shopping results, so for instance, when I was looking for a bag for my Cowboy Carter thing, they take the information from around the web about. So for instance, this is Reddit considerations about whether or not bags are good and how they all work. And then they also are referring to previous searches that they have within ChatGPT. They're also looking at shopping elements from Etsy and eBay and things like that. So they're pulling through from lots of different elements to give you the information that you need. So when customers, it's important to remember that customers are going to see lots of different touch points around your products. So think about that when you're looking at this. In terms of the product feeds, they're also now asking for people to submit information. So you can get the full spec on the ChatGPT merchants website, and at chatgpt.com/merchants. And they have, the kinds of product feeds that folks who are working in ecom are very familiar with. So you can sign up to submit your feed. At the moment, they have about 20 product verticals, but they're probably looking to roll out more. Um, and they also recently have rolled out their instant checkouts, which is something that means that basically people can buy directly in ChatGPT. So rather than sending people to websites, you can buy within ChatGPT. It's currently only open to U.S. sellers in on Etsy, but they have a pipeline, and they're rolling it out to additional partners. And they're steering this via Stripe and PayPal merchants, and this will make it more easy for people to buy within ChatGPT in a like fully agentic sort of space. Which brings me to my next recommendation. So when we're thinking about the whole agentic space, it's really important to consider like all of these new protocols. So Google launched an agentic payment protocol. And OpenAI have also released the agentic commerce protocol, and all of these things are tools to help agents to move autonomously and to buy products and to choose products on behalf of customers. And one of the things that's important about this is that, and this is why I mentioned partners, is that you don't have to do this on your own. At Wix, for instance, we are partners with PayPal and with Stripe, and we are fully signed up to the Agentic Commerce Protocol. And so you can literally go on the Wix documentation right now, and you can see this. This is actually a quote from it, information about PayPal's Agentic Commerce services. And essentially, what's going to happen with this is that your products will be able to be found by shoppers who use AI bots with the PayPal app. And I mentioned before that ChatGPT's instant checkout is also going to be doing this. And so this helps you to connect with a new audience, makes the shopping experience faster and easier. This will reduce friction and give you opportunities to connect with more folks. So, and when we think about this, it's important to remember that I've mentioned a few people here. I've mentioned Stripe, I've mentioned PayPal, I've mentioned Wix. I've mentioned Etsy. And that's really critical to think about when you're considering your partners in this time of agentic change, because it's quite tricky for a small business to get involved with with OpenAI and moving at scale. But it is not difficult for a small business to build a Wix website. It's not difficult for a small business owner, for instance, to set up an Etsy account. So have a look at the kinds of players which are opening the doors for agentic commerce for you and for your clients in the days ahead. And we've made this super, super easy. So for instance, if you are interested in PayPal Agentic Commerce services, and we are rolling this out right now. So if you have a Wix account and you don't see this in your sales channels home, don't panic. It will be coming your way soon. And essentially, we've just put it into our channels. So the same place that you would add Wix point of sale or you would add an eBay shop, you can add your PayPal Agentic Commerce services. And this makes it a lot easier for you to take advantage of some of these transformative changes that we're seeing. So the final thing I want to chat about is LLMs.txt. Now, I fell into a little bit of a rabbit hole around LLMs.txt, and when I came out the other side, I realized that there's a couple of ways that we've been thinking about this a little bit wrong. So we've in the LLM, the AI space have been very concerned about whether or not you can show on AI search with LLMs, and that's absolutely that's critical. Or with LLMs.txt, this is critical and it's important. And I have an article, this article, for instance, where I show that there's lots of ways in which LLMs.txt has been seen on Google, on Perplexity, on AI mode, on ChatGPT, and lots of different surfaces. So it is possible for an LLMs.txt to be surfaced by AI, and it is possible for LLMs.txt to be surfaced by Google. There's around 60,000 LLMs.txt files that seem to be indexed on Google. And I've seen that fluctuate using the search modifier. I talk about it in the article. But there's around 60,000 that are indexable, that are indexable in that way. But what I did find, and what I found really, really interesting after looking at over 1,400 LLMs.txt files, diving into GitHub and various different places, was that all of the folks who are at the forefront of this new agentic wave, the Agentic Commerce Protocol, the A2A protocol, the Agentic Payment Protocol, they are all using LLMs.txt. In fact, Stripe has it linked in the footer of their documentation website, and they're using it in different ways. They're using it in order to give agents instructions. They're using it to expose API REST calls for agents. They're using it to prepare their website and to make the content and information and indeed the tool sets of their websites available for agents, for AI agents. And that I think is fascinating. And one of the reasons why they're doing that is because the tokenization cost for LLMs.txt is way, 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 way smaller than it is for raw HTML. So I had a look at the LLMs.txt .org homepage, which is a fairly simple homepage. And for that homepage, when you look at the raw HTML, which is what LLMs look at, they will see it will use 15,000 tokens to access that homepage. In comparison, when I went to the same pages, the same domains, LLMs.txt, it only used 158 tokens. And this is huge because this costs money. So I think that it's important to remember that when we're thinking about all of these things, that it comes down to access, it comes down to taking advantage of all of the different elements that are available to you, and making use of all of the different opportunities that this new wave of e-commerce is making available to you. And with that, thank you.